The human chef in the alien palace. Darren stood quietly, his heart beating fast as the doors of the alien palace opened before him. The guards in silver armor said nothing. They only stared with glowing yellow eyes. Their faces were hidden behind smooth metal masks. He could feel their judgment, their suspicion. He was the only human on this planet, maybe even in the entire star system. A few weeks ago, Darren had been a simple chef on a space station near the ruins of old Earth. He had cooked meals for tired space workers, nothing fancy. Then, out of nowhere, a messenger arrived. A golden drone landed beside his food stall and gave him a message in a soft voice. You are summoned to cook for the House of Nizari. Refuse, and Earth's last kitchen license will be revoked. He didn't have a choice. So here he was, walking down a long hall with glowing walls and strange alien art, being led deeper into the palace of a species he had never met before. He had heard rumors about the Nizari Empire. They were powerful, beautiful, and dangerous. Their empress hadn't spoken to anyone in over 100 years. Some said she was cursed. Others said she had grown cold after a war that destroyed half her galaxy. And now, Darren was going to cook for her. The kitchen was like nothing he had ever seen. Floating knives, heatless stoves, fruits that blinked, spices that hummed softly when touched. The kitchen eye blinked at him and said, "Welcome, human. Prepare something that will not offend." Darren took a deep breath. He didn't know what kind of food the Nizari liked. He had no menu, no guide, no helper, just his old instinct as a chef. He decided to go simple. Earth-style grilled meat, seasoned lightly. Some roasted roots that smelled similar to carrots. A light sauce made from the blinking fruits. As he cooked, the guards stood outside the kitchen, still silent. One of them finally spoke, his voice low in warning. Do not look into her eyes. Do not speak unless spoken to. And whatever you do, do not make her moan. Darren blinked. Excuse me. The guard said nothing more. The meal was placed carefully on a silver tray and floated away on its own. Darren didn't even get to see who took it. But after 5 minutes, something strange happened. All the guards outside the kitchen stepped back. The air grew colder, then warmer, then heavy. The lights dimmed. The floating knives fell to the ground. Even the spices went silent. Then she walked in. She didn't wear a crown, but it was clear this was the Empress. Her skin was like liquid silver. Her long hair floated around her as if she were underwater. Her eyes, impossible to describe. They glowed, but not with light, with power. Her dress shimmered with stars, and her feet didn't even touch the ground. Darren stood still. He dared not speak. He dared not breathe too loudly. She walked to the plate he had prepared earlier. She picked up a piece of grilled meat with her fingers and brought it slowly to her lips. She bit. She chewed. She closed her eyes. And then, she moaned. Not a normal moan. It echoed through the room. The sound seemed to shake the walls. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion. Deep, powerful emotion. The kind that could melt ice or start wars. Guards stormed in. Alarms flashed red. One of the priests fainted. The Empress opened her eyes and looked straight at Darren. Everyone froze. Darren stood still, caught in her gaze. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. She took a step closer to him. Then another. And then she whispered, loud enough for all to hear. I have not tasted anything so real in centuries. Her voice was soft, but it held power. She stared at Darren, eyes glowing brighter. You, human, what are you? Darren tried to answer, but his voice cracked. I'm just a cook. The Empress tilted her head slightly. A strange smile touched her lips. You are more than that now. And then she left, without another word. The guards looked at Darren like he had just insulted the gods. One of them whispered, she has chosen. Outside the palace walls, across alien stars, The news would soon spread. The silent empress moaned, because of a human. And nothing would be the same again. She tasted more than just his food. Darren didn't sleep that night. He lay on the cold, smooth bed in the small guest chamber the palace had given him. The walls were strange, like living crystal, humming softly, reacting to his thoughts. Lights faded in and out like a heartbeat. But the chef couldn't rest. His hands were still shaking. The image of the empress, her glowing eyes, her silver skin, her soft but powerful moan. It kept replaying in his mind like a dream. What did she mean when she said, "You are more than that now"? The next morning, palace servants brought him new clothes, smooth robes of dark blue and gold, stitched with tiny moving stars. He refused at first, saying, "I just want to cook." The servant, a floating orb with blinking eyes, replied, "The empress has given orders. You are now her personal flame." Darren didn't know what that meant. He didn't want to know. He walked to the kitchen again. Same floating knives, same whispering spices. But this time, the guards outside the door stepped back when he approached, as if afraid. No one spoke to him directly. No one dared. He began cooking again, this time making a soup from glowing roots and small cubes of starflesh, alien fish that pulsed gently even after being sliced. The scent was sweet, salty, and rich. He didn't notice the air behind him shift. He didn't hear the sound of her silent steps. He only noticed when a soft breath touched the back of his neck, and a voice, low, musical, and warm, spoke. "So you do cook with feeling." Darren spun around. The empress was there, only inches away. No guards, no ceremony, no throne, just her. Her silver skin seemed to glow brighter today, and her long floating hair shimmered with a blue aura. She wore no shoes. Her presence filled the room like heat from a fire. "I didn't know you were behind me," he said, trying not to stare. "Good," she replied. "You made it honest." He looked down. "I didn't mean to upset you yesterday. With the food. I didn't know." She raised a finger. He stopped talking. "I haven't tasted anything since the wars," she said. "I lost the will to feel. I forgot how to want. But your food," she stepped closer. "It woke something in me. Something ancient. Something dangerous." Darren took a step back. "I'm just a cook," he said again. "No," she whispered. "You are the first man I've wanted to taste." Before he could react, she leaned forward and touched her lips to his neck. Not a kiss, but a slow, burning touch of warmth. His skin sizzled, not painfully, but like electricity under water. A strange symbol appeared where her lips had touched, glowing faintly, like fire drawn in ink. Darren gasped. What did you do?" The empress stepped back, her eyes sharp now. "I've marked you. My sisters will sense it. The council will rage. But I do not care." He stumbled back, heart racing. "Why? What do you want from me?" She smiled. "I want to remember what it means to feel. And you are the only one who can make me." That night, word spread across the palace. The Empress of Silence, who had not touched a soul in 100 years, had marked a human male. Some celebrated in secret. Others trembled in fear. Inside the palace, high above the kitchens, the council of elders met. The air was tense, filled with heat and static. These were ancient beings, gray-skinned, horned, dressed in robes that moved like smoke. "She cannot bond with an outsider," one said. "She has already started," another replied. "And the ancient heat has awakened." They all looked at each other. Then he must die before the bond completes. Meanwhile, Darren sat alone on his bed, staring at the mark on his neck. It was still glowing. No matter how much he washed, it didn't fade. He remembered the moan, the eyes, the hunger in her voice. What had he stepped into? Suddenly, his chamber door opened. A figure slipped inside, quiet as wind. Not a guard, not a servant. The figure removed their hood. It was a woman, young, fierce eyes, sharp jaw, dressed like a shadow. "You don't know what you've done," she said quickly. "You don't understand what she is." "I didn't choose this," Darren whispered. "She did," the woman replied. "And now the Empress's bond with you is starting. If it finishes, your mind will not survive." Darren froze. "What?" "She's not just alien. She's Nizeri Prime. Her kind bonds through soul fire. It changes both bodies. If you're not ready, you'll burn." "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I used to be her handmaiden," she said, stepping closer. "I saw what happened to the last one she bonded with. He didn't survive." Darren's voice cracked. "So what do I do?" "Leave," she said. "Tonight. Escape while the moons are low. If you stay, she will consume you." But Darren couldn't leave. As he packed a small bag and prepared to slip out, a presence filled the hallway outside. The Empress was standing there. Not angry, not surprised, just waiting. "You were going to run," she said softly. "I'm scared," Darren replied. "So am I," she whispered. He blinked. You're afraid?" "Yes, because if you leave, I will return to silence, and I cannot survive that again." There was something raw in her voice. Honest. Real. She stepped closer. "I won't force you, but if you stay, if you feed me again, not just with food, but with yourself, there is no turning back. You will be mine. Entirely." Darren looked into her glowing eyes. For a moment, he saw not a queen, not a monster, but a woman, longing for warmth. And in a quiet voice, he said, "Then I'll stay." The taste that changed the galaxy. Darren stayed. Even when he had the chance to escape, even when the Empress warned him that there was no turning back, he stayed. Not because he was brave, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because deep inside, he felt something strange, something real. And because no one had ever looked at him the way she did. The next morning, the sky above the palace turned a deep violet. The twin suns of the planet glowed red. The Nizeri called this day the Crimson Bloom, a rare event that only happened once every 100 years. It was a time when emotions ran wild, when bonds formed were eternal. On that day, the Empress invited Darren to her private garden. No outsider had ever stepped there before, not even her generals or council members. The garden floated above the palace on a suspended island, held in the air by crystal vines. Flowers sang softly as they bloomed. The air sparkled with golden dust. Alien birds with silver wings chirped songs that echoed in the mind. And in the center stood a glowing pool, the pool of memory. Darren stood beside the Empress, nervous, hands shaking. She wore no crown, no heavy robes, just a soft dress of flowing light. Her eyes were calm, but watching him closely. "I brought you here," she said, "so you may understand me." She walked into the pool. Water did not wet her skin. It shimmered off her like mist. Then she held out her hand. "Come." Darren hesitated, then stepped into the pool with her. The moment his foot touched the surface, the world changed. Ethelish. He was no longer in the garden. He was floating in space. Not dead, not cold, just there, watching. He saw a younger Empress, fierce, angry, leading battleships into war. Her voice shook entire planets. Her enemies trembled at her name. Valari the Storm Mother. He saw her lose people she loved. Friends, sisters, whole worlds. He saw her smile vanish forever. He saw her sit alone on a throne, year after year, century after century, never speaking, never feeling. Then, suddenly, he saw himself. The moment she tasted his food, the moment she moaned, and the storm inside her cracked open. Back in the pool, Darren gasped. The vision faded. Valari stood in front of him, her eyes softer now. "Now you see," she said, "why I chose silence. Why I feared taste, touch, feeling. Darren nodded slowly. You were protecting yourself. Yes, she said. But now, I don't want protection. I want something real, even if it burns me. As they stepped out of the pool, a strange pulse spread through the palace. It shook the walls. It echoed through the stars. High above, in orbit, a satellite picked up the signal and sent it across the galaxy. Within minutes, thousands of alien systems knew one thing. The Empress has entered a bond with a human. Far away on a dark world, a group of shadowed figures sat in a circle. Their skin was rough, their eyes red. They were the broken houses, ancient enemies of the Nizari. The Empress has chosen her mate, one of them growled. A human worm, another hissed. She is weakening. The bond has made her feel again. Now is the time to strike. Back on the palace world, Darren was led to a new chamber. Not small like before, but a high tower made of white stone. Inside was a single golden chair, and a bed shaped like a blooming flower. Valerie stood at the door. There is one final part of the bond, she said quietly. Once it begins, it cannot be undone. You will feel what I feel, and I will feel what you feel. Across time, across space, forever. Darren took a deep breath. Will it hurt? She smiled gently. Only if you fight it. That night, under the crimson twin moons, the Empress and the human sat close together, hands joined. No one else was allowed near. Their hearts beat slowly at first, then faster, then together, and then light. Pure light burst from their joined hands. Their eyes glowed gold. The symbol on Darren's neck burned bright. Valerie's silver skin shimmered like a star. Their minds connected. Their feelings merged. Darren felt centuries of pain and silence, then sudden, warm love. Valerie felt confusion, fear, kindness, and something new, hope. She gasped, not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of emotion. A sound escaped her lips, a long, soft moan that shook the windows, echoed through the palace, and rode a wave of psychic energy into space. Every ship in orbit heard it. Every elder in the council felt it. On distant planets, beings paused and whispered, "Did you hear that? She's awake." But not everyone was happy. In the palace shadows, an assassin received a final message. "Kill the human," it said, "before the bond becomes permanent." The assassin nodded, blades ready. Inside the tower, Valerie rested her head on Darren's shoulder. "You've changed me," she whispered. Darren touched her hand. "You changed me too." She smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in 100 years. But outside the door, death was waiting. Alien desire and the forbidden law. The tower stood tall against the night sky, glowing softly under the light of the twin moons. Inside, Darren and Empress Valerie sat together on the petal-shaped bed, their hands still touching. The bond between them had begun. But the galaxy was not silent. In the deepest corners of space, ancient laws had been broken, and laws always came with consequences. Darren opened his eyes the next morning, expecting warmth beside him. But Valerie was gone. He stood up quickly, searching the room. He stepped out onto the white balcony and saw her, standing alone on the floating platform just beyond the garden, facing the stars. He joined her slowly. "Did I hurt you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, you gave me something I thought I would never feel again." "What is it?" "Desire," she said quietly. "Not just of the body, but of the soul." She turned to him. "But desire comes with danger, especially for someone like me." That morning, the council summoned her. Valerie stood before 7 ancient elders, each wrapped in dark robes, seated on stone chairs that hovered in the air. Their voices echoed without movement. "You have broken the pact of purity," one said. "You have joined with an outsider," said another, "a flesh being not of our kind. This bond threatens the balance." A third warned, "He must be removed." Valerie did not flinch. No. The room went quiet. You defy us? An elder asked. I do, she answered, because I am no longer ruled by fear. I chose this human, and I choose to feel. Back in the tower, Darren was visited by someone unexpected. A tall woman with dark green skin, covered in glowing tattoos, entered his chamber silently. She bowed slightly. I am HFY, keeper of the laws. Darren stood cautiously. What do you want? To warn you, she said. Your bond with the Empress is real. But ancient forces will not allow it to last. The heat has begun. He blinked. The heat. HFY nodded. When a Nizeri prime bonds with an outsider, their body enters a cycle. A deep hunger. If not satisfied properly, it can burn both alive. Darren swallowed hard. What does that mean for me? It means she will soon lose control. Her desire for you will rise until it consumes her. And you must choose to match it, or walk away forever. That night, Valari returned, her skin glowing warmer than usual. Her voice was softer, yet cracked with hidden tension. Darren, I need to ask something I have never asked anyone. He sat beside her. Anything. She touched his chest gently. If I lose control, if I become something else, promise you will bring me back. Darren nodded. I promise. But deep inside, he wondered, how powerful could this bond become? Outside the tower walls, the assassin moved like a shadow. No name, no voice, only blades dipped in poison that could kill even starborn blood. He crept along the balcony, scanning for guards. But the guards had been dismissed. Valari had wanted this time alone with Darren. The assassin reached the chamber door and pulled out a small device. It buzzed softly. The lock faded. The door opened. He entered. Inside, Darren was pouring tea. The scent was calming. Valari sat on the couch, trying to relax. The glow from her skin was pulsing now. Slow, then fast, like a warning. Suddenly, crash. The assassin rushed in, blades flying. Darren grabbed a tray and blocked the first strike. Sparks flew. He shouted, Valari, run. But she didn't run. She stood, eyes blazing gold. You dare enter my space, she hissed. The assassin lunged again, straight at Darren's chest. But Valari moved like lightning. With one wave of her hand, the assassin froze mid-air, suspended by invisible threads. You want to kill the one I bonded with, she whispered coldly. Then you can die knowing I felt something first. She clenched her fist. The assassin screamed once, and then turned into ash. Darren sat on the floor, breathing hard. Valari stood over him, trembling, not from fear, but from power. Her bond had awakened something even she didn't understand. She fell to her knees beside him. Are you hurt? No, he said, but you didn't have to do that. She looked into his eyes. I did, because they won't stop coming. That same night, the council met again. She is lost to us now, one elder said. She has chosen her mate over her people, said another. There is only one option left. They all stood. Invoke the final law. Meanwhile, Darren and Valari sat together once more, under the stars. Her skin glowed softly now. Her breathing was heavier. The heat had begun. I don't know if I can control it, she whispered. Darren took her hand. Then don't. She looked at him, confused. You've always held back, he said. You've always lived in silence, in fear, but not anymore. He leaned forward and kissed her, not with fear, but with full, honest feeling. The air around them burned. A second bond formed, stronger than before. Their minds twisted together like vines, hearts sensing into one beat. Her moan this time wasn't loud, but deep, personal, a sound that only he heard, echoing through his chest like music. But far above them, a massive ship entered the system, black as night, covered in bone. At its center, A beam of energy began to charge. Target: the Tower of the Empress. Enemies of the Empress want him dead. Above the skies of Mazari Prime, something dark approached. A battleship unlike any other. Its hull was made of black bone and broken moons. Its engines did not hum. They growled like beasts. This was the Devourer, a war relic from the ancient times. Only one house had the madness to reactivate it. House Vernex, sworn enemies of the Empress, now desperate to stop the bond between her and the human. Inside the tower, Valeri sat still, eyes closed, lips trembling. Her skin pulsed with heat and glowing energy. She had wrapped herself in thin layers of silk that could barely contain the warmth. The heat phase had begun. Darren stood beside her, gently wiping her forehead with a wet cloth. He didn't understand everything, but he saw the pain in her eyes. He saw her trying to hold back, for his sake. "You don't have to suffer alone," he whispered. Valeri opened her eyes, golden and fogged. "I'm trying not to hurt you." "You won't," he said. "Let it out. Whatever's inside you. Trust me." She took a shaky breath. "If I lose control, I could tear this tower apart." Darren gave a small smile. "Then I'll rebuild it. After I cook us breakfast." For the first time that day, she laughed. A real laugh. Not royal. Not stiff. Just Valeri. And in that moment, even with fire in her blood, she leaned forward and kissed him again, tender at first, then deeper, hungrier. Their minds connected. Their hearts sensed. The tower lights flickered. Then, the sky exploded. A blast rocked the tower. The windows shattered inward. Guards shouted in panic. Sirens screamed through the city. Valeri stood up, glowing brighter than ever. Her body floated inches off the ground. She turned to the window and saw the black battleship approaching. "No," she whispered. "They've come." Darren followed her gaze. "Who?" "Vernex," she said darkly. "They want you dead." "Me?" he asked. "Why?" "Because I've chosen you. And if I bond completely with a human, their power over me breaks." She turned to him. "They don't want me free." In the palace war room, holograms lit up with red alerts. Defensive towers tried to charge their shields, but the Vernex weapon was ancient and illegal. It could pierce energy walls and disrupt minds. "They're going to hit the tower again," said a general. "We have to evacuate the Empress." But Valeri's voice thundered through the system, echoing in every guard's head. "No one takes me from him. Not now. Not ever." Outside, the second beam charged. Inside, Valeri raised her hand. She didn't scream. She didn't rage. She simply whispered one word: "Mine." A massive pulse of light burst from her body, surrounding the tower like a living shield. The beam hit, but bounced off her light and scattered into the atmosphere, setting 3 moons on fire. Darren watched, stunned. "You did that." Valeri turned to him. Her skin shimmered like hot glass. "I'm not done." She floated higher, her arms spread. The sky above turned gold. Energy flowed from her like rivers of light. Darren couldn't even move. He could only watch as his bondmate became something beyond royal. Something divine. Her voice echoed across the stars. "Touch what's mine again, and I will end your house." The Vernex ship paused, but only for a moment. Then it opened a hatch, releasing dozens of assassin pods toward the tower. Guards shouted and scattered. Each pod contained a warrior bred for one thing: kill the human. They hit the ground like thunder, tearing through stone and glass. Valeri growled, fire swirling around her hands. But Darren stepped forward. "I have to fight too." "You are no warrior," she said. "I'm your bondmate," he replied. "And I'm not letting you face this alone." Valeri touched his chest. "Then take my flame." Suddenly, fire rushed into his body, not burning him, but changing him. His eyes glowed. His skin hardened. His breath tasted like stars. He turned and picked up a broken pipe from the floor, then swung it as the first assassin charge. The fight had begun. What followed was chaos. Assassins poured into the tower halls. Darren fought with new strength, each swing of his arm guided by Valeri's bond inside him. Guards returned to help. Blades clashed. Walls burned. Valeri hovered above it all, raining fire and light on her enemies. One by one, the assassins fell. But then, one reached Darren from behind. The blade came fast. Too fast. Valeri screamed, a moan of fear this time, filled with soul and fire. The sound reached the blade, and the metal melted before it could touch Darren. The assassin fell to ash. When it was over, the tower was broken, but still standing. Darren collapsed beside Valeri, both covered in sweat, dust, and light. She wrapped herself around him, her voice shaky. "You almost died." "But I didn't," he whispered, "because you felt me. You saved me with a sound." She nodded slowly. That's what the heat does when the bond is true. It connects body and soul. Above the palace, the Vernex ship powered up again. But before they could strike, the full council of Nizeri ships arrived. Dozens of glowing warships surrounded the enemy, weapons locked. A message was sent: "Leave, or be destroyed by your own kind." The Vernex retreated, but they wouldn't forget. Back in the palace, the council elders had no more words. They couldn't stop her now. The bond had survived war, assassination, and heat. It had become legend. Valeri looked at Darren, still weak but smiling. "I don't need a throne anymore. Just you." Darren grinned. "Well, and maybe a working kitchen." She laughed again. "Then I'll give you both." But far away, in a darker part of the galaxy, someone else was watching. A voice spoke from a cold chamber. "If one human can awaken a prime empress, then imagine what would happen if we harvested more." The final taste. A bond unbreakable. The battle was over. The tower still stood, damaged, cracked, but strong. Just like them. Valeri and Darren sat on the shattered balcony, their bodies close, skin touching. The stars above blinked gently, like they were watching, like they had been witnesses to something rare. The Empress's long silver hair flowed around them. Her head rested against Darren's shoulder. He ran his fingers slowly through her glowing strands. Neither of them spoke for a while, because words couldn't capture what they felt. Their bond had passed every test. Pain, fear, fire, war. Now only one step remained. Valeri finally whispered, "The ritual of completion." Darren looked at her. "What is it?" "It's the last step in a soul bond. It cannot be undone, not even by death." She turned her golden eyes toward him. "It will join our minds, forever. My pain will become yours. My memories will enter your heart. My heartbeat will echo in your bones." Darren didn't speak for a moment. Then he said softly, "I'm not afraid of you." Valeri shook her head gently. "You should be. I'm not just a queen, Darren. I'm a creature of energy, storm, destruction. I burned 10,000 ships with one command. I broke planets with my words." He took her hand. "But you healed, with a taste." That night, Valeri led him deep below the palace, to a place no human had ever seen. The Chamber of Flame and Memory. It was a circular hall carved into the heart of the world. The walls pulsed with soft red light. In the center stood a glowing pool, not water, but liquid memory. It shimmered like starlight, moving without sound. "This," Valeri said, "is where the bond becomes eternal." She looked nervous. For the first time since he met her, Darren saw fear in her eyes. He smiled and held out his hand. "Let's do it together." They stepped into the pool. Suddenly, the world around them vanished. No more stone. No more chamber. They stood in a realm of light, floating between stars. Valeri's body shone like fire. Darren's glowed with warm blue light. All around them, memories floated, hers and his. He saw her childhood, a lonely girl standing before a dying sun. He saw her first battle, ships falling, screams, silence. He saw her cry alone in a room made of gold. He saw her stop tasting food, stop touching others, stop feeling. Then, he saw his own life. His mother's smile in a dusty kitchen. The first time he held a knife and cut an onion. The loneliness after Earth fell. The hunger for meaning, for connection, for something real. Their memories merged. Then their voices did too. "I see you," she whispered. "And I accept you," he said. Their lights twirled together, spiraling like twin comets. Their bodies pulled close, floating in the light. And then, they kissed. Not just lips. Souls. Their moans didn't echo in the air. They echoed across space. In ships light years away, pilots dropped their cups and gasped. In distant temples, priests fell to their knees. In old databanks, machines paused and whispered, "The Empress has truly bonded." Back in the palace, the pool of memory calmed. Villari and Darren rose from it slowly, still holding hands. They had not just merged, they had reborn. Her voice now carried his thoughts. His heart now carried her storms. They looked into each other's eyes and smiled. "I don't feel lonely anymore," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. But just when peace seemed close, an urgent knock shook the chamber door. A guard's voice called out, "My Empress," a message from the Galactic core. Villari dressed quickly in her light robes and opened the door. A silver orb floated in. It blinked red. She touched it. The message played in the air. "To the Empress and her human, we see what you have done. Your bond has awakened more than love. It has awakened power. The universe will never be the same. The Council of Distant Systems will now vote. Should interspecies soul bonding be banned?" Darren frowned. "They want to make this illegal." Villari nodded slowly. "They fear what they don't understand. They think we are too strong together." She turned to Darren. "Let me fix this. Let me speak before the council." But Darren shook his head. "No," he said. "Let us speak together." The next day, in the heart of the galaxy, the Galactic Core Council gathered. It was a ring-shaped arena floating around a blue sun. Inside, thousands of alien representatives sat in silence. None had ever seen a human stand beside an empress before. Villari stepped forward, but she didn't wear a crown. She wore a simple robe. Her hand was joined with Darren's. She didn't speak first. He did. "I'm not a warrior," Darren said. "I'm not a royal. I don't have armies or empires. I just cook. I just feel." He looked at Villari. And she felt me. Not my power. Not my bloodline. Just me. He turned to the crowd. "If love across stars scares you, maybe you should ask yourselves why." Silence. Then Villari spoke. "My people forgot how to feel. I forgot how to taste. Until a human gave me flavor again. I moaned, not in weakness, but in rebirth. And now, I will not go back." The council stayed silent for a long time. Then, one by one, lights turned green. Approval. Another. Then another. Until the whole arena glowed. And someone whispered, "Let them taste. Let them bond. Let them love." Back on Nizeri Prime, a grand celebration began. Villari and Darren were crowned not as empress and consort, but as galactic flames, symbols of new union, new hope. That night, in the quiet garden above the palace, Darren cooked for Villari again. Nothing fancy. Just grilled fruit, soft bread, and honey. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and moaned once more. But this time, it wasn't the moan of awakening. It was the moan of completion. Her moan echoed across the stars. The stars above Nizeri Prime sparkled brighter than ever. It had been 7 days since the Council of Distant Systems allowed interspecies bonding to remain legal. 7 days since the galaxy watched a human man and an ancient empress hold hands and speak as one. Now stories of them spread like wildfire, across planets, moons, and even silent asteroids. They weren't just a couple. They had become a symbol. But not all were ready to celebrate. In the distant system of Xerax, hidden deep in cold gas clouds, a secret gathering took place. They called themselves the Purity Ring, leaders from ancient alien bloodlines who hated change. "Her bond with the human is spreading weakness," growled one elder with stone skin. "No," whispered another, eyes glowing black. "It's spreading power, and it's not ours. We must stop it before others follow." Their plan: end the bond, kill the human, break the flame. And for that, they would unleash something long buried. Back on Nizeri Prime, Darren walked through the palace gardens alone. He didn't wear a crown. He didn't dress like royalty. He was still a simple man. But now, every being he passed bowed slightly. Even the trees seemed to lean toward him. He stopped near the edge of a floating bridge and looked out across the silver sea. Valerie appeared beside him, quietly, gracefully, as she always did. "Still not used to the attention?" she asked. He smiled. "I'm still not used to your flowers singing when I walk past." She chuckled, soft and beautiful. "They like you. Everything does now. Even this planet has accepted you." Darren looked into her glowing eyes. "And you." "I more than accept you," she whispered. "I feel you in my veins." She placed her hand on his chest. He covered it with his. Their bond pulsed. 2 heartbeats, now fused into one. Later that night, they stood atop the celestial balcony, a sacred place where no empress had taken another soul before. Valerie wore a glowing robe made of nebula light. Darren wore a simple coat, the same color as Earth's sky. She took his hands and said, "Do you know why I brought you here?" He shook his head. "Because this is where I dreamed of ending everything," she said quietly. "Years ago, I stood here thinking, what's left? I had ruled. I had won. I had lost. I had nothing." She leaned closer. "And now, because of you, I have everything again. But even love can't stop fate from testing you one last time." At that very moment, above their planet, space cracked. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a tear in the sky. From it crawled a void beast, a creature made of shadow and ancient anger, awakened by the Purity Ring to destroy all emotion-based energy bonds. Its goal: devour the flame between Darren and Valerie. Inside the palace, sirens howled. Guards activated defense grids. The skies turned black. Valerie's eyes widened. "No." Darren stared at the sky, frozen. What is that?" Valerie stepped forward, her robe flaring with energy. "Something we were never meant to face again. I buried that creature eons ago. It eats bonds. Love. Hope. Then we fight it," Darren said. "You don't understand," she said, trembling. "If it touches me, it will erase our bond. I'll forget you. I'll forget this." "No," he said, grabbing her hand. "I won't let you." As the void beast descended, Darren did something no human had ever done. He stepped forward. Alone. No armor, no weapon, just his voice. "Hey," he shouted. "You want a bond? Come taste mine." The beast growled. Dark lightning cracked across the sky. Valerie screamed. "Darren, no." But he kept walking. The creature struck with its shadow claw. And at that moment, Valerie ran toward him. They touched, and the bond between them exploded into light. A wave of golden energy blasted outward. Not fire, not weaponry. Emotion. Real, raw, human. The memory of their first touch, the sound of her moan, the way he made soup with love, The way she whispered his name like a prayer, the promise they made, to feel, no matter the cost. It hit the creature like thunder. It screamed, not in anger, but in fear. Then it crumbled into stardust. Silence returned. The sky opened once more, and the stars bowed. Darren fell to his knees, panting. Valerie rushed to him, holding his face in her hands. Are you hurt?" He smiled. Only a little singed pride. She laughed. "You fool. You beautiful, brave, stupid human." He kissed her. The stars turned gold. Days later, the galaxy made its decision. The story of the human and the Empress wasn't banned. It became law. A new holiday was formed, the Day of Taste, celebrating bonds of feeling, food, and fire. Across worlds, aliens tasted Earth dishes and tried human emotions. They laughed. They loved. They moaned. And somewhere, on a small balcony of a rebuilt tower, Darren cooked grilled fruit while Valerie lay with her head on his lap. "Do you still feel it?" he asked. She nodded. "Always." And far, far away, on a distant moon, a child asked his alien mother, "Mom, what's that sound in the sky every year?" She smiled. "That, my child, is the moan of the Empress, echoing across the stars, a sound born not from hunger, but from love."